The importance of the Aleppo Codex, the reason that this manuscript is so important and is one of the most important books in the world, is rooted in the importance of the Bible to the Jewish people. In 70 AD, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed and the Jews are exiled. And until then, if you were exiled from your country, basically you disappeared as a people. And the Jews wanted to be an exception. They didn't want to disappear, so they had to come up with a kind of mechanism that would allow them to survive even though they'd been dispersed. And the mechanism that they invented basically has worked so well that we no longer even think about it at all. The idea was that a people could be held together by words. They would be held together by a book that they would all read at the same time. And they would read exactly the same book. And the book that I'm talking about is the Hebrew Bible, which is 24 books, the Old Testament. For that to work, though, everyone needs to be reading precisely the same book, because any minute difference in the text could lead to a splintering of the faith. If one group in Yemen reads a passage in a certain way and another group in Poland reads the same passage in a different way, you might end up with two different religious groups. So you need an agreed upon text. You need kind of the atomic clock of Judaism, the perfect copy of the Bible. It takes centuries for that to be put together. And in 930 AD or so, it is created, and that manuscript is the Aleppo Codex. The question of why everyone knows the Dead Sea Scrolls and almost no one knows the Aleppo Codex, and the question of how I came to the story are actually connected. The Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, are 2,000-year-old biblical books and fragments and other books that were found near the Dead Sea and surfaced in the mid-20th century. The Aleppo Codex is, in terms of the Jewish religion, a more important manuscript. The Dead Sea Scrolls don't have religious significance for Jews. They have a lot of significance to scholars, scholars of early Judaism, scholars of early Christianity. But as far as Judaism is concerned, the Aleppo Codex, the perfect text of the most important book that Jews have, is a more important manuscript. Its story is more complicated than the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's a story that some of the people involved in it, certainly in the last chapter of its story in the 20th century, which is the subject of my book, it's a story that a lot of those people preferred not to have told. As a result, when I came to it in 2012, it had never been told, which is quite astonishing, considering that many of the events that I recount happened in the 1940s and 1950s. I found it pretty much by chance in the Israel Museum, which is Israel's national museum in Jerusalem. And I was in the gallery where the Dead Sea Scrolls are kept. It's a book. It's a separate building called the Shrine of the Book. And if you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls gallery, it's usually full of people, tour buses full of visitors. The day that I was there, I think it was Germans. Just a crowded gallery looking at these manuscripts, which really are, as I say in the book, they're celebrities, the Dead Sea Scrolls. But if you take a staircase that leads down from this gallery into basically a basement, as I did, I went down these stairs and found myself in a dark and empty room with no other visitors. And on one side of this room, in a glass case, was a manuscript that I'd never heard of, and it was the Aleppo Codex. And that's how it all started. That was in 2008, and I spent about 4 years writing the story of the book until my own book came out in 2012. Giving up the idea of publishing the whole story, I wouldn't give in even on certain points that lawyers wanted to have removed from the text in the Israeli edition. There was a big fight about one of the chapters close to the end, and it got to the point where basically I had to say either we publish the whole book or I'm taking it somewhere else, and then we ended up publishing the whole book. One of my main inspirations for the book was not a work of nonfiction, but was The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. And he's quoted at the beginning of the book, and I quote him also at the end of the book, because that book, The Name of the Rose, is about the power of a book. And it's a very different book. In the case of The Name of the Rose, it's a forgotten or hidden work by Aristotle on comedy that's hidden in a monastery. And it triggers a series of dramatic events that end with the destruction of the monastery. It kind of arouses passions in the monks of the monastery, and all kinds of dramatic and terrible things begin to happen because books have power. That's the point of the story, that a book is obviously an inanimate object, but it's not like a lamp or a chair. A book can change your mind. A book can make you do things. A book can make you kind of crazy. And that's what happens in Umberto Eco's story, and it's kind of what happens in this story as well. I'm thrilled that the book is coming out in French. I recently received a copy of the book in French, and I was so happy to have it that I just sat looking at it for a while, pretending that I had actually written it in French. I think every group of readers, and I think it's been published now in 7 or 8 languages, comes to the book with a very different take on it. They read the same book very differently. So the book was published in English and it was read in one way. The book in Hebrew was read in a very different way. I'd love to know how it's read in French. It's not just, translation isn't just a matter of translating the words. The book is really a different book in each language, and the people reading it read a different book, a similar book, but a different book. And I would love to know how French readers, what French readers read when they're reading this book. So anyone who reads it should feel free to let me know.